The transport vessel Harmony's Edge shuddered as it docked with Station Nexus 7, the massive orbital platform that served as the Galactic Confederation's primary military recruitment center. Through the reinforced viewing ports, the sprawling structure stretched endlessly in all directions, its metallic surface dotted with docking bays that could accommodate ships from hundreds of different worlds. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool, transparent steel, watching as vessels of every imaginable design came and went like a swarm of mechanical insects. Somewhere in the distance she could make out the distinctive angular hulls of Crathari warships, their crimson paint jobs gleaming under the station's artificial lighting. Closer to her position, a group of Threnody heavy cruisers sat in formation, their obsidian surfaces seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Nervous little human?" the voice came from behind her, dripping with barely concealed amusement. Elena didn't need to turn around to know it belonged to Vextar, a young Crathari warrior who had made the journey from Earth alongside the other recruits. His species stood nearly 8 feet tall on average, with thick, chitinous plates covering their bodies and razor-sharp claws that could slice through most known metals. Elena turned slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 5'4", she barely came up to Vextar's chest, and her slight build made her appear even smaller in comparison to his bulky frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held a calm that seemed almost unnatural given the circumstances. "Should I be?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying none of the excitement or fear that most recruits displayed on their first day at the academy. Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. "The Confederation military is not a place for the weak human. Perhaps you should have remained on your little blue world tending to your gardens and writing your poetry." Several other recruits had gathered around now, drawn by the familiar sound of interspecies tension. There was Gorak, a massive Ursani whose bear-like appearance was enhanced by natural armor plating and claws that could tear through stone. Beside him stood Zephyra, a serpentine Naga whose coiled lower body could crush bones to powder, while her Sikh's arms each ended in hands capable of precise manipulation or devastating strikes. "The human does look rather fragile," Gorak rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Are you certain your species met the minimum physical requirements for admission?" Elena's expression didn't change. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times during the selection process on Earth, and she suspected she would hear it many more times in the days to come. The Galactic Confederation had only recently extended membership to humanity, and their inclusion had been met with considerable skepticism from the established military powers. Humans, after all, lacked the natural advantages that made other species formidable warriors. They had no chitinous armor like the Crathari, no crushing strength like the Ursani, no venomous fangs like the Naga. Their skin was soft, their bones were relatively fragile, and their teeth were designed more for omnivorous feeding than combat. By every measurable standard, they were among the physically weakest species in the known galaxy. "I'm here, aren't I?" Elena replied simply. Before anyone could respond, the transport's intercom crackled to life. "All recruits report to Bay 7 for disembarkation. Academy orientation begins in 30 standard minutes." The group began to move toward the exit, but Vextar wasn't finished with his entertainment. He stepped deliberately into Elena's path, his massive frame blocking her way. Up close, the differences between their species were even more pronounced. His exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting, and she could see the intricate patterns of scars that marked him as a proven warrior even before his formal military training. "Move aside," Elena said calmly. "Make me, little human." His claws extended slightly, not quite a threat, but certainly not a friendly gesture. "Show us this legendary human ingenuity we've heard so much about." The other recruits formed a loose circle, their expressions ranging from curiosity to anticipation. This was exactly the sort of confrontation that everyone expected when different species were forced to work together. The strong would establish dominance, the weak would submit, and the natural order would be maintained. Elena looked up at Vextar's face, studying the alien features with the same calm intensity she had shown while gazing out at the station. Then, without warning, she moved. Her hand shot out faster than anyone had expected. finding a specific point just below Vextar's primary breathing spiracle. Her fingers pressed inward with surgical precision, and the massive Krithari warrior suddenly found himself gasping for air. His claws flailed wildly, but Elena was no longer where she had been. She had stepped to his side, maintaining pressure on the vital point while staying well clear of his natural weapons. "The spiracle leads directly to your primary respiratory chamber," she explained conversationally, as if she were giving a biology lesson rather than demonstrating a combat technique. "Humans may not have natural armor, but we do have something your species seems to lack. We study our opponents." Vextar tried to speak, but only managed a strangled wheeze. His eyes, compound and multifaceted, showed something that might have been surprise. "We've been observing galactic species for decades before making contact," Elena continued. "We know that Krithari breathing spiracles are vulnerable to pressure. We know that Ursani have a blind spot directly above their heads due to the configuration of their skull ridges. We know that Naga lose mobility when their body temperature drops below a certain threshold." "You!" gasping as his breathing returned to normal. The other recruits had gone silent, their earlier amusement replaced by something that looked suspiciously like wariness. "The thing about humans," Elena said, adjusting her simple civilian clothes as if nothing had happened, "is that we might not be the strongest or the fastest or the most naturally armed. But we learn, we adapt, and we never, ever give up." The transport's exit ramp began to lower, revealing the bustling interior of Station Nexus 7. The sound of hundreds of different languages created a cacophony that somehow managed to be both chaotic and oddly harmonious. Elena shouldered her single bag and walked toward the ramp, her movements still calm and controlled. As she passed Vextar, who was still recovering from his unexpected lesson in human anatomy, she paused for just a moment. "Oh, and one more thing," she said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough for the other recruits to hear. "I wasn't trying to hurt you just now. I was being gentle." The walk through Station Nexus 7 was a sensory overload that would have overwhelmed most beings, but Elena absorbed every detail with the focused intensity of someone who had trained her entire life for this moment. The station was essentially a small city suspended in space, with multiple levels connected by transport tubes and gravitational lifts that accommodated species with vastly different locomotion needs. The recruitment bay was enormous, easily large enough to hold several thousand beings. Representatives from dozens of worlds stood in organized groups, their various physiologies creating a bizarre but somehow beautiful tapestry of galactic diversity. Elena found herself assigned to Processing Station 7 along with roughly 50 other recruits from various worlds. The processing officer was a Thrinidae, one of the silicon-based species that resembled walking crystals. Lieutenant Commander Quartzhigh's voice resonated with harmonic overtones that made translation somewhat challenging, but the meaning was clear enough. Each recruit would undergo a series of evaluations designed to determine their optimal placement within the Confederation military structure. Elena watched as her fellow recruits were called forward one by one. The evaluation process seemed straightforward enough: physical capability testing, psychological profiling, and skill assessment. What quickly became apparent was that the testing protocols had been designed primarily with traditionally powerful species in mind. The strength test involved lifting progressively heavier weights until the recruit reached their maximum capacity. Vextar managed to lift nearly 3 times his own body weight, while Goric easily exceeded that mark. When Elena's turn came, she lifted what she could, respectable for a human but laughably weak by galactic standards. The testing officer, a bored-looking Zentaran with 4 arms, barely looked up as he recorded her pathetic numbers. The speed test was conducted on a track that curved through 3 dimensions, requiring participants to navigate obstacles while maintaining maximum velocity. Again, Elena's human limitations were painfully apparent. She completed the course cleanly, but her time was among the worst recorded. Combat assessment involved sparring matches against holographic opponents that adjusted their capabilities based on the recruit's demonstrated abilities. Elena faced a sequence of increasingly challenging scenarios, using techniques she had learned during her years of training on Earth. She won some matches and lost others, but nothing about her performance suggested exceptional ability. By the time testing was complete, Elena had been classified as Category D to support personnel. Her assignment would be to one of the non-combat vessels in the fleet, probably handling logistics or communications. It was exactly what everyone had expected. What nobody noticed was that throughout the entire evaluation process, Elena had been holding back. Not obviously she had performed well enough to avoid suspicion, but she had been very careful not to reveal the full extent of her capabilities. The other recruits, focused on impressing the evaluators with their raw power, had missed the subtle signs that she was operating far below her actual limits. As the group was led to their temporary quarters to await final assignment, Elena allowed herself a small smile. The first phase of her mission was complete. She had successfully infiltrated the Confederation military structure without raising any alarms. Now the real work could begin. That evening, as the recruits settled into their assigned dormitories, Elena lay on her narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling. The quarters were designed to accommodate multiple species, which meant they were somewhat awkward for everyone, but functional enough for their purposes. The lighting could be adjusted for different visual spectra. The atmosphere could be modified within reasonable limits, and the furniture could be reconfigured to suit various body types. Her bunkmate was a Vorthan, a species that resembled an 8-foot-tall praying mantis with an extra set of arms. Cassandra had been assigned to combat duties aboard one of the heavy cruisers, and she seemed both pleased with her assignment and somewhat puzzled by Elena's apparent lack of disappointment at being relegated to support roles. "You do not seem upset by your classification," Cassandra observed, her translated voice carrying undertones of curiosity. "Most warriors would consider such an assignment to be shameful. Who says I'm a warrior? You carry yourself like one, your movements are controlled, your awareness is constant, and you showed considerable knowledge of alien physiology during the incident with the Crithari. Yet you performed poorly in the evaluations. Maybe I'm just not very good at tests." Cassandра's head tilted at an angle that would have been impossible for most vertebrates. "Or maybe you did not want to do well." Elena studied the alien's compound eyes, trying to read the emotion behind them. Vorthans were known for their analytical minds and their ability to see patterns that others missed. It appeared that Cassandra was more perceptive than Elena had anticipated. Why would someone deliberately fail a military evaluation? Elena asked, neither confirming nor denying the observation. Many reasons. Perhaps they seek assignment to a specific type of vessel. Perhaps they wish to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Perhaps they have objectives that are not immediately apparent. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the corridor outside. Through the thin walls, they could hear angry voices and what sounded like the beginning of a physical confrontation. Elena sat up, listening carefully to the sounds. "Sounds like someone's having a disagreement," she said casually. The noise grew louder, and they could now hear clearly that it involved at least 3 different species. There was the clicking speech of a Crithari, the rumbling tones of an Ursani, and the hissing of what was probably a Naga. From the sound of it, the argument was escalating quickly toward violence. "Should we intervene?" Cassandra asked. Elena was already moving toward the door. Probably not a good idea to let recruits kill each other on their first night. The scene in the corridor was exactly what Elena had expected. Vextar, Gorak, and Zephyra had cornered a smaller recruit, a member of the Pixian species, which resembled a cross between a bird and a lizard. Pixians were known for their intelligence and their skill with technology, but they were physically frail even by human standards. The confrontation had apparently started over access to one of the common area terminals. The Pixian, whose name tag read Chirpwing, had been using the device when the 3 larger species had decided they wanted it. What followed was a predictable display of intimidation tactics that was about to turn violent. "Move away from the device, little bird," Gorak was saying, his massive form looming over the trembling Pixian. "Creatures like you should not be playing with equipment designed for real warriors." "I was here first," Chirpwing managed to say, though his voice shook with fear. "I have as much right to use the terminal as anyone. Rights are something you earn through strength. Zafira added, her serpentine body coiling menacingly. Weaklings have no rights. Several other recruits had also emerged from their quarters, creating an audience for whatever was about to happen. She could see Clixisandra positioned near the doorway behind her, ready to act if necessary. "Is there a problem here?" Elena asked mildly. Vexstar's mandibles clicked in amusement when he saw her. "Ah, the little human, come to defend another weakling. Perhaps you should mind your own business." "Actually," Elena said, walking closer to the group, "I was hoping to use the terminal after Chirpwing finishes. I need to review the technical specifications for the vessels I might be assigned to." She moved with the same calm deliberation she had shown earlier, but this time the other recruits were paying more attention. They had seen what she could do when provoked, and several of them took an involuntary step backward. "You think your little pressure point trick will work twice?" Gorik asked, though his tone was less confident than his words suggested. "I think," Elena replied, "that anyone who needs to gang up 3-1 against someone half their size probably isn't as strong as they pretend to be." The corridor fell silent except for the background hum of the station's life support systems. Elena's words carried an implication that went far beyond the immediate situation. She was questioning not just their tactics but their fundamental courage and honor. For warrior species, such a challenge could not be ignored. Zafira struck first, her coiled body unspringing like a released spring as she launched herself toward Elena with lethal intent. Her fangs were fully extended, dripping with venom that could paralyze most known species within seconds. Elena sidestepped the attack with minimal movement, her hand finding a specific point on Zephyra's neck as the Naga flew past. The strike was precise and economical, and Zephyra crashed to the floor, her nervous system temporarily disrupted by the blow to a critical nerve cluster. Gorik roared and charged. His massive claws extended and his natural armor plates flared in a threat display that would have sent most creatures fleeing in terror. Elena dropped into a crouch, rolled between his legs, and came up behind him. Her elbow found the gap between his armor plates at the base of his skull, and the huge Ursani stumbled forward, momentarily dazed. Vexstar had learned from his earlier encounter and approached more cautiously, his claws weaving defensive patterns as he advanced. He was trying to use his reach advantage while avoiding the close-range techniques Elena had demonstrated before. Elena watched his approach with interest, as if she were studying a particularly complex puzzle. Then she moved forward, not backward as he expected. She ducked under his guard, spun past his claws, and delivered a series of rapid strikes to specific points along his exoskeleton. Each blow was precisely targeted at the joints between his armor plates, and within seconds Vexstar found that his limbs were no longer responding properly to his commands. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. Elena stood in the center of the corridor, surrounded by 3 much larger opponents, who were either unconscious, dazed, or temporarily paralyzed. She wasn't even breathing heavily, and her simple civilian clothes weren't even wrinkled. She looked around at the gathered recruits, her expression as calm as ever. "The terminal's free now," she said to Chirpwing, who was staring at her with something approaching awe. As she walked back toward her quarters, Elena could feel the weight of dozens of eyes following her movement. The careful facade she had maintained during the evaluations was beginning to crack, but perhaps that was inevitable. She had attracted attention, which was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. Behind her, Clixisandra was helping the 3 defeated recruits to their feet. The Vorthan's compound eyes tracked Elena's movement with new understanding, and Elena could practically hear the analytical wheels turning in her bunkmate's head. The mission parameters were clear: infiltrate the Confederation military, gather intelligence on their tactical capabilities and strategic weaknesses, and report back to Earth Command. What the parameters hadn't accounted for was the difficulty of maintaining a low profile, while simultaneously dealing with the sort of bullying and intimidation that seemed endemic to military culture. Elena settled back onto her bunk and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her ability to balance her mission requirements with her personal principles. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their cunning or even their adaptability. It was their absolute refusal to back down from a fight no matter how badly the odds were stacked against them. And Elena Vasquez, despite her small stature and unassuming appearance, was about to become the perfect example of why underestimating humans was a potentially fatal mistake. Hashtag commentary alleged weakness is a lie, Part 2. The assignment came through 3 days later, delivered via a standard military communication pad that materialized Elena's orders in the flowing script of the Confederation's primary administrative language. She had been assigned to the CNS Stellar Harmony, a support vessel responsible for supplying the 7th Fleet during their patrol of the Outer Rim territories. It was exactly the sort of posting that confirmed her status as a non-combatant, someone deemed too weak for real military service. Elena read through the assignment details with apparent satisfaction, nodding as if this was precisely what she had hoped for. Around her, other recruits were receiving their postings with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Vexstar had been assigned to a heavy cruiser, Gorek to a battle carrier, and Zafira to a fast attack vessel. Even Chirpwing, despite his diminutive stature, had been placed aboard a reconnaissance ship where his technical skills would be valued. Only the humans seem to be consistently relegated to support roles. It appears your species has a particular talent for logistics, Clixendra observed as she reviewed her own assignment to an intelligence vessel. The Vorthan had been watching Elena carefully since the corridor incident, and her analytical nature made her comments seem casual while being anything but. "We're good at organizing things," Elena agreed, folding her assignment pad and tucking it into her bag, making sure everyone gets what they need when they need it. What she didn't mention was that support vessels often had access to information that combat ships never saw. Supply records, personnel transfers, strategic resource allocation, communication relay data, all of it passed through the logistics network that kept the massive Confederation military machine functioning. For someone gathering intelligence, there was no better position than one that appeared completely harmless while providing access to everything. The transport to the Stellar Harmony was a standard military shuttle, designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Elena found herself sharing the cramped passenger compartment with a dozen other new crew members representing 7 different species. The conversation was minimal during the 6-hour journey, partly due to the close quarters and partly because most of the passengers were lost in their own thoughts about their first real military assignment. Elena used the time to study her fellow passengers, memorizing faces and observing behavioral patterns. There was Lieutenant Korvac, a Threnody engineering officer whose crystalline structure refracted light in patterns that indicated either deep concentration or anxiety. Beside him sat Ensign Meritada, aquatic Delphinian, who required a specialized environment suit to survive in standard atmosphere. Of particular interest was Senior Chief Torkin, a grizzled Krathari veteran whose scarred exoskeleton spoke of decades of military service. Unlike the younger members of his species Elena had encountered at the academy, Torgan carried himself with the confident calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. His compound eyes tracked movement with the automatic awareness of a predator, but there was something thoughtful in his posture that suggested intelligence to match his obvious combat experience. When the shuttle finally docked with the Stellar Harmony, Elena got her first look at what would be her home for the foreseeable future. The support vessel was massive, nearly a kilometer in length, but its bulk came from cargo bays and supply compartments rather than weapon systems. Its armament was minimal, enough to discourage raiders, but nothing that would threaten a proper warship. The ship's interior was a maze of corridors that connected storage areas, processing facilities, and living quarters for a crew of nearly 3,000 beings. Everything was designed with functionality in mind, creating an environment that was efficient but far from comfortable. The air recycling systems carried the mingled sense of 100 different worlds, creating an olfactory cocktail that took some getting used to. Elena's quarters were in the junior officers section, a small but private compartment that she would share with no one. Her official rank was Logistics Specialist 3rd Class, which placed her near the bottom of the ship's hierarchy but gave her access to the supply management systems that were her primary objective. Her commanding officer was Commander Urixtel, a Zentauran whose forearms allowed him to process information streams that would overwhelm most species. He greeted Elena with the same disinterested efficiency he showed all new arrivals, handing her a datapad containing her duty assignments and schedule. "You'll be working in Supply Distribution Center 7, he explained, his translator rendering his rapid speech into flat, emotionless standard. "Your job is to track requisitions, manage inventory levels, and ensure that all requests are processed according to regulation. It's not complicated work, but it requires attention to detail." Yelena accepted the assignment with apparent gratitude, as if she couldn't have hoped for anything better. "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." "See that you do." The efficiency of this ship depends on everyone performing their duties correctly, regardless of how mundane those duties might seem. Supply Distribution Center 7 turned out to be exactly what Elena had hoped for, a vast computer complex that handled resource allocation for 17 different star systems. The center was staffed by a mixture of organic beings and AI systems, all working together to ensure that the Confederation's military forces received everything they needed to maintain operational readiness. Elena's workstation was positioned near the center of the facility, giving her access to data streams from across the fleet. Her official duties involved processing routine supply requests, but the position also provided opportunities to observe information flows that revealed strategic patterns and tactical preparations. Within her first week aboard the Stellar Harmony, Elena began to understand the true scope of the Confederation military. The organization was vast beyond anything Earth's intelligence services had imagined, with resources that dwarfed the combined military might of humanity, yet for all its apparent strength, the system showed signs of inherent weaknesses that a careful observer could identify and potentially exploit. The Confederation's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability, the diversity of species that made up its forces. Each member world contributed according to their particular strengths, creating a military machine with capabilities that no single species could match. But this diversity also created communication problems, logistical challenges, and cultural conflicts that constantly threatened operational efficiency. Elena watched these patterns emerge as she processed thousands of supply requests each day. She saw how Krathari units consistently over-ordered ammunition, while Threnody forces required specialized equipment that was difficult to manufacture and transport. She observed how territorial disputes between species affected unit assignments and how cultural taboos created unexpected gaps in military capability. More importantly, she began to identify the information networks that connected different parts of the military hierarchy. Every supply request told a story about unit positioning, strategic planning, and operational priorities. By analyzing these patterns, Elena could piece together a remarkably detailed picture of Confederation military capabilities and intentions. Her work attracted no attention from her supervisors, who were pleased to have found someone who could process requisitions efficiently without asking unnecessary questions. Elena's human appearance reinforced the assumption that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a minor functionary grateful to have any role in the mighty Confederation military. What her colleagues didn't realize was that Elena's mind was capable of processing and correlating information in ways that would have impressed even the most advanced AI systems. Her apparent focus on routine tasks masked a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation that was mapping the Confederation's military structure in unprecedented detail. 3 weeks into her assignment, Elena's carefully maintained routine was disrupted by an unexpected visitor to Supply Distribution Center 7. Senior Chief Torgan appeared at her workstation during the middle of her shift, his scarred exoskeleton gleaming under the facility's harsh lighting. "Specialist Vasquez," he said, his translated voice carrying undertones that the universal translator couldn't quite capture. "I need to speak with you." Elena looked up from her displays with the same mild attention she showed everyone who interrupted her work. "Of course, Senior Chief. How can I help you?" Privately, he added, gesturing toward one of the small conference rooms that adjoined the main facility. Elena saved her work and followed the veteran Krathari to the indicated room, her mind racing through possible reasons for his interest. Had she made some mistake that drew attention to her activities? Had someone noticed patterns in her information access that shouldn't have been there? The conference room was small and spartanly furnished, designed for brief meetings rather than extended discussions. Torgan activated the room's privacy screen, ensuring that their conversation would be shielded from both electronic surveillance and casual observation.
"You're not what you appear to be," he said without preamble.
Elena maintained her expression of polite confusion. I'm sorry, Senior Chief, but I don't understand what you mean. I've been watching you since you came aboard, Torgan continued, his compound eyes studying her with uncomfortable intensity. You process information faster than our best AI systems, you never make mistakes, and you ask exactly the right questions at exactly the right times. Most importantly, you access data in patterns that suggest you're building something much more comprehensive than routine supply management. The accusation hung in the air between them, precise and potentially devastating. Elena weighed her options carefully, considering the various ways she could respond. Denial would be the safest course, but Torgan's tone suggested he had evidence to support his suspicions. What do you think I'm building? She asked carefully. Intelligence profiles, strategic assessments, vulnerability analyses. Torgan's mandibles clicked softly. The question is whether you're working for the Confederation's intelligence services or for someone else entirely. Elena studied the scarred warrior's face, looking for clues about his intentions. His posture was alert but not aggressive, suggesting that he wasn't preparing to arrest her or sound an alarm. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about her answer. And if it were the latter, she asked, then I would be very interested in learning more about your objectives. The response was unexpected enough that Elena allowed her careful composure to slip slightly. She had prepared for the possibility of discovery, but she hadn't anticipated that her discoverer might be sympathetic to her cause. Why would you be interested in something like that? Torgan was quiet for a long moment, his compound eyes reflecting the room's lighting in complex patterns. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested years of accumulated frustration and disillusionment. Because I've spent 43 years serving the Confederation military, and I've watched it become something that no longer serves the interests of peace or justice. The organization that once protected the galaxy from genuine threats has become a tool for maintaining the power of established species at the expense of newer members. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully before continuing. Your species was granted membership in the Confederation, but you were never truly welcomed. You've been systematically excluded from meaningful participation, relegated to support roles, and treated as second-class citizens despite your obvious capabilities. It's a pattern I've seen repeated with other species, and it represents everything that the Confederation military was supposedly created to prevent. Elena listened to his words with growing understanding. Torgan wasn't just a disgruntled veteran, he was someone who still believed in the ideals that the Confederation claimed to represent, even as he recognized that those ideals had been corrupted by political reality. What are you suggesting, Senior Chief? I'm suggesting that someone with your skills and your access might be able to identify systemic problems that need to be addressed. I'm also suggesting that such a person might benefit from having an ally who understands how the military hierarchy actually functions. The offer was as unexpected as it was potentially valuable. Elena had planned to operate alone, gathering information while maintaining her cover as a harmless logistics specialist. The possibility of having an inside ally with Torgan's experience and access could accelerate her mission significantly. But it also represented a risk that could compromise everything she had worked to build. I appreciate your offer, she said carefully, but I'm not sure I understand what you think I could accomplish. Change. Torgan replied simply. Real change, not just cosmetic adjustments designed to placate critics. The Confederation military needs to remember what it was created to accomplish, and sometimes that requires outside perspective to identify problems that insiders can't see.
Elena made her decision with the same calm precision she brought to everything else.
What kind of help are you offering? Access to information networks that your current position can't reach. Introduction to other personnel who share my concerns about the organization's direction. Most importantly, protection from the consequences of asking inconvenient questions. Where is any lesser town? Nothing more than the hope that someone with your abilities will use them to make things better rather than simply gathering intelligence for purposes I can't predict, a motion that Torgan recognized despite the anatomical differences between their species. His clawed appendage enclosed her smaller hand carefully, sealing an alliance that would change both their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. Over the following weeks, Elena's intelligence-gathering operation expanded dramatically. With Torgen's guidance, she gained access to communication networks, personnel files, and strategic planning documents that revealed the Confederation military structure in unprecedented detail. She learned about internal political conflicts, resource allocation disputes, and the complex web of alliances and rivalries that shaped military policy. More importantly, she began to understand how the Confederation's apparent strength masked fundamental weaknesses that a determined opponent could exploit. The diversity that gave the military its power also created vulnerabilities that could be turned against it. Species-specific equipment requirements, cultural conflicts, and communication barriers all represented potential pressure points that could disrupt operations if properly targeted. Elena's reports to Earth Command, transmitted through carefully encrypted channels, painted a picture of an organization that was powerful but not invulnerable. The Confederation military commanded vast resources and impressive technological capabilities, but it was also bureaucratic, politically fractured, and increasingly complacent about potential threats. What her superiors on Earth didn't know was that Elena was beginning to question whether exploitation of these vulnerabilities was the right approach. Her conversations with Torgen had introduced her to other military personnel who shared his concerns about the organization's direction, and she was starting to see possibilities beyond simple intelligence gathering. The Confederation military had problems, but it also represented the best hope for maintaining peace across a galaxy filled with potential conflicts. Rather than weakening it for Earth's advantage, perhaps the better approach was to help it become what it claimed to be, a force for justice and protection that served all member species equally. The realization that her mission objectives might not align with the greater good was troubling, but Elena was beginning to understand that the most important battles were often fought not against external enemies but against the corruption of ideals that were worth preserving. As she continued her work in Supply Distribution Center 7, processing requisitions while building her comprehensive intelligence network, Elena Vasquez was unknowingly approaching the moment when she would have to choose between her loyalty to Earth and her growing commitment to something larger than any single world's interests. The galaxy was about to discover that humans possessed not just physical and intellectual capabilities that their apparent weakness concealed, but moral complexity that could reshape the foundations of interstellar civilization itself. Her alleged weakness is a lie. Part 3. The crisis began with a routine supply run to the mining colony on Kepler 442c, a barren world rich in the rare minerals needed for faster-than-light drive components. Elena was processing the standard requisitions when anomalous readings began appearing in the sensor data streams that fed through her workstation. At first, the irregularities seemed like simple equipment malfunctions or atmospheric interference, but her trained eye recognized patterns that suggested something far more significant. Unknown vessels were moving through the outer system, their signatures partially masked by stealth technology that was more advanced than anything in the Confederation's current arsenal. Elena's analysis suggested at least 12 ships, possibly more, approaching the mining colony from multiple vectors in a coordinated attack pattern. She immediately contacted Torgen through their established secure channel, transmitting the data along with her preliminary analysis. The veteran Krathari's response was swift and alarming. The sensor signatures matched intelligence reports about the Boyd Hunters, a mysterious raider faction that had been attacking isolated Confederation outposts for the past several months. They struck with military precision, overwhelming their targets quickly and completely before disappearing back into deep space. No survivors had ever been recovered from their attacks, and no demands for ransom or territory had ever been issued. They simply appeared, destroyed everything they encountered, and vanished. Elena's discovery put the Stellar Harmony in an impossible position. The support vessel was 3 hours away from the mining colony at maximum speed, and its minimal armament would be useless against a coordinated attack fleet. The nearest Confederation warships were at least 6 hours distant, far too far to provide meaningful assistance. Commander Ixtel received Elena's report with the characteristic efficiency of his species, his 4 arms working simultaneously to process the information, while issuing preliminary orders to the ship's senior staff. Within minutes, the Stellar Harmony was changing course toward Kepler 442c, even though everyone understood that they would likely arrive too late to help. Elena found herself summoned to the ship's command center, a sprawling complex of interconnected stations that coordinated the vessel's various functions. The center was buzzing with activity as crew members from dozens of different species worked to understand the developing situation and formulate a response. Specialist Vasquez, Commander Yurixtel addressed her as she entered the command center. Your analysis of the sensor data was remarkably detailed. I'm told you identified attack vectors and tactical formations that our dedicated intelligence officers missed. Elena maintained her expression of modest competence, though internally she was calculating the implications of increased scrutiny. I've always been good with pattern recognition, sir. The data seem to suggest coordinated movement. I'm temporarily reassigning you to tactical analysis. Your insights may prove valuable as we attempt to understand what we're facing. The reassignment placed Elena at the heart of the ship's intelligence operations, giving her access to information networks she had never hoped to reach through her logistics position. More importantly, it put her in direct contact with the Stellar Harmony's most senior officers, including several who had expressed private doubts about Confederation military policy. As the support vessel raced toward what was likely to be a futile rescue mission, Elena worked with a mixed team of analysts to piece together everything known about the Void Hunters. The picture that emerged was disturbing and puzzling in equal measure. The Raiders possessed technology that was clearly superior to standard Confederation equipment, but their tactics suggested goals that went beyond simple resource acquisition. They targeted specific types of facilities, research outposts, mining operations, and communication relays, while ignoring more valuable targets that would have been easier to capture and exploit. More puzzling was their apparent disinterest in prisoners or hostages. Every attack had resulted in complete destruction of the target facility, with no survivors recovered. This wasn't the behavior of typical raiders who usually sought to minimize resistance and maximize profit. Elena's human perspective brought a different analytical framework to the problem, one that focused on strategic rather than tactical implications. While her colleagues examined weapon signatures and shield configurations, she studied target selection and timing patterns that revealed a broader operational strategy. They're not raiders, she announced during a staff briefing 6 hours into their journey toward Kepler. 442C. The command staff turned to her with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. Commander Yurixtel gestured for her to continue. Explain your reasoning. Raiders attack targets of opportunity for immediate gain. Elena said, calling up her analysis on the main display screen. They want cargo, captives, or strategic resources that can be quickly converted into profit. But look at the Void Hunter target selection. The display showed a three-dimensional map of known attacks, with each incident marked by time, location, and facility type. When viewed as a whole, the pattern was unmistakably deliberate. They're targeting the infrastructure that supports Confederation expansion into this sector, mining operations that provide strategic materials, research facilities that develop new technologies, and communication nodes that coordinate military operations. This isn't random raiding, it's systematic warfare designed to limit Confederation influence in the region. The implications of Elena's analysis rippled through the command center like a shockwave. If she was correct, the Void Hunters represented a far more significant threat than anyone had realized. They weren't criminals or opportunistic pirates. They were a military force with clear strategic objectives and the capability to achieve them. Lieutenant Commander Silkai, the ship's Threnody intelligence officer, studied the display with growing alarm. If this analysis is correct, then Kepler 442C isn't just another raid. It's part of a comprehensive campaign to drive the Confederation out of this entire sector. Which means, Elena added quietly, that our response needs to be strategic, not just tactical. Commander Yurixtel was processing the implications with the rapid efficiency of his species, but even his enhanced cognitive capabilities seemed overwhelmed by the scope of the problem. What kind of strategic response could a single support vessel provide against a coordinated military campaign? Elena had been thinking about that exact question since her initial analysis, and she had reached conclusions that her superiors weren't going to like. Our armament is insufficient and our mission profile doesn't support sustained combat operations. But we have capabilities they might not expect and access to information networks that could disrupt their operational planning. She paused, knowing that her next words would commit her to a course of action that would blow her cover completely. I recommend that we abandon the rescue mission to Kepler 442c and instead focus on gathering intelligence about their base of operations. The mining colony is probably lost already, but we might be able to track their withdrawal routes and identify their staging areas. The suggestion was tactically sound but politically impossible. Confederation military doctrine demanded that rescue operations take priority over intelligence gathering, especially when civilian lives were at stake. For Elena to suggest otherwise revealed a level of strategic thinking that was inconsistent with her supposed role as a logistics specialist. Commander Urixtel studied her with new intensity, his four arms working independently to access personnel files and service records. You seem remarkably well informed about military strategy for someone whose training focuses on supply management. Yelena realized that the moment of decision had arrived earlier than she had anticipated. Her careful cover was beginning to unravel, and she could either retreat into her assumed identity or commit fully to the path she had chosen. I've studied more than just logistics, she said simply. Before anyone could respond to her admission, the Stellar Harmony's long-range sensors detected new contacts approaching their position. The unknown vessels were moving on an intercept course, their engine signatures matching those of the raiders who had attacked Kepler 442c. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as crew members rushed to battle stations and defensive systems powered up throughout the ship. Elena found herself assigned to a tactical analysis station, tasked with providing real-time intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. What she saw on her displays confirmed her worst fears about their situation. The approaching force consisted of 8 vessels, each one significantly more advanced than anything in the Confederation's current fleet. Their hull configurations were unlike any known design, suggesting either a previously unknown species or technology that had been developed in complete secrecy. More ominously, their approach pattern indicated coordinated tactics that required extensive training and operational experience. Estimate time to weapons range? Commander Urixtel asked. 47 minutes at current approach speed, Elena replied, her analysis appearing on the main tactical display. But sir, I'm reading power signatures that suggest they could increase velocity significantly if they choose to.
The commander's expression darkened as he absorbed the implications.
The Stellar Harmony was trapped between the approaching raiders and the gravity well of Kepler 442c, with insufficient time to escape to hyperspace before the enemy reached weapons range. Elena's mind raced through tactical possibilities, considering options that a logistics specialist shouldn't know existed. Her training on Earth had included extensive study of asymmetric warfare principles, preparing her for situations where conventional military responses were inadequate. Sir, she said carefully, I have a suggestion that might improve our survival chances. I'm listening. The raiders have been successful because they faced targets that tried to fight them conventionally. Military outposts that relied on standard defensive tactics, mining facilities that followed prescribed emergency procedures, but we're not a combat vessel, which means we're not constrained by conventional tactical doctrine. Elena called up a new display showing the Stellar Harmony's internal layout, highlighting the massive cargo bays and supply compartments that comprised most of the ship's volume. We're carrying enough industrial explosives to level a small city, along with mining equipment, construction materials, and various chemical compounds that could be repurposed for defensive purposes. More importantly, our cargo handling systems are designed to deploy large objects rapidly. The implications of her suggestion began to dawn on the command staff. She was proposing that they turn their supply vessel into an improvised weapons platform, using their cargo as ammunition and their loading systems as delivery mechanisms. It was brilliant, unconventional, and probably suicidal. The risk of internal explosion would be enormous, Lieutenant Commander Silk High pointed out. One direct hit could set off a chain reaction that would destroy the entire ship. Yes, Elena agreed, but continuing on our current course guarantees destruction anyway. This approach at least gives us a chance to inflict significant damage before we're overwhelmed. Commander Wyrixtel was quiet for a long moment, his multiple arms working to calculate probability matrices and strategic outcomes. Finally, he looked up from his displays with an expression that might have been admiration. "Implement Specialist Vasquez's recommendations," he ordered. "All departments reconfigure for unconventional defensive operations. We're going to show these raiders what happens when they underestimate a Confederation supply ship." Elena's transformation from logistics specialist to tactical coordinator was complete, and her carefully maintained cover was now irrelevant. As she worked with the ship's engineers to modify cargo systems into weapon delivery platforms, she realized that her mission had evolved far beyond simple intelligence gathering. She was no longer just observing the Confederation military, she was actively working to defend it against an enemy that threatened everything she had come to value about the organization's ideals. The revelation was both liberating and terrifying because it meant that her loyalty to Earth Command was now secondary to her commitment to something larger. The approaching battle would test not just the Stellar Harmony's improvised defenses, but Elena's own understanding of where her true allegiance lay. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when human ingenuity and determination were unleashed in defense of principles worth fighting for. As the enemy fleet drew closer and the ship's crew prepared for what might be their final battle, Elena Vasquez felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Her alleged weakness is a lie. Part 4. The battle for the Stellar Harmony began exactly 39 minutes after the enemy fleet was first detected, when the lead raider vessel opened fire at what should have been extreme weapons range. The fact that their energy beams reached across that distance with devastating accuracy confirmed Elena's worst fears about their technological superiority. The first strike hit the supply ship's port shield generators, overloading them completely and sending feedback surges through the primary power grid. Emergency lighting flickered throughout the vessel as backup systems struggled to compensate for the sudden power drain. Elena was stationed at her tactical analysis console, coordinating the deployment of improvised weapons while simultaneously tracking the enemy's attack patterns. Her modifications to the cargo handling systems had been completed in record time, turning the Stellar Harmony's massive loading bays into giant projectile launchers capable of hurling multi-ton containers at significant velocity. "Enemy vessels are closing to optimal firing range," she announced to the command center. "Recommend immediate implementation of Defensive Pattern Alpha." Commander Wyrixtel nodded grimly, his forearms working to coordinate responses across multiple ship systems simultaneously. "Execute Defensive Pattern Alpha. All hands brace for impact." The Stellar Harmony shuddered as its cargo bays began launching their improvised ammunition. Industrial containers filled with mining explosives streaked toward the approaching raiders, followed by construction materials that had been hastily rigged with proximity detonators. The effect was unlike anything seen in conventional space warfare. Instead of precise energy weapons and guided missiles, the supply ship was hurling crude but devastatingly effective projectiles in every direction. The raiders had clearly expected to face standard Confederation defensive tactics, and their formation was optimized for avoiding energy weapons and missile attacks. They were completely unprepared for the chaotic barrage of massive objects that suddenly filled the space around them. Two of the smaller raider vessels were caught completely off guard, their advanced shields designed to deflect coherent energy beams rather than absorb the kinetic impact of multi-ton projectiles. The first container to hit exploded against its target's hull with enough force to crack the vessel's structural framework, sending it spinning out of control. The second impact was even more devastating, triggering a chain reaction that destroyed the enemy ship completely. Elena watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction as the enemy formation broke apart, individual vessels maneuvering frantically to avoid the continuing barrage from the Stellar Harmony's cargo bays. Her unconventional tactics had achieved something that conventional weapons could never have accomplished. They had disrupted the raiders' coordinated attack pattern and forced them into reactive rather than offensive positioning. but the respite was temporary. The remaining 6 enemy vessels quickly adapted to the new threat, using their superior speed and maneuverability to stay clear of the supply ship's improvised projectiles while maintaining deadly accurate fire with their advanced energy weapons. "Shield strength down to 40% and falling," reported Lieutenant Commander Silkai. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. We've lost primary life support to sections C through F." Elena studied the tactical display, analyzing the enemy's new attack pattern while calculating the Stellar Harmony's remaining capabilities. Their improvised defense had bought them time and inflicted casualties, but the fundamental mismatch in technology and firepower remained unchanged. "Sir," she said to Commander Yurixtel, "I'm reading a massive energy buildup in the lead raider vessel. Whatever they're preparing to fire, it's going to be significantly more powerful than their previous attacks." The commander's expression darkened as he absorbed the implications. The raiders had apparently decided to end the engagement quickly, bringing their heaviest weapons to bear despite the risk of destroying valuable salvage. Elena's mind raced through tactical possibilities, searching for options that didn't exist in any military manual. Her human training had prepared her for asymmetric warfare, but the current situation was beyond anything she had studied. They needed a solution that was both unconventional and immediately available. Then she remembered something from her intelligence analysis of Confederation supply networks. The Stellar Harmony was carrying more than just industrial equipment and raw materials. Deep in its cargo holds were experimental technologies being transported to research facilities throughout the sector.
"Commander," she said urgently, "we're carrying prototypes of the new quantum resonance torpedoes."
They're not armed or tested, but the theoretical specifications suggest they could penetrate the Raider's shielding. "Those prototypes are classified at the highest levels," Commander Yurixtel replied. "How do you know about them?" Elena realized that her knowledge of classified cargo manifests was another break in her carefully maintained cover, but the current crisis left no time for elaborate explanations. "I processed the shipping documentation," she said simply. "The technical specifications were included in the handling requirements." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it was far from the complete truth. Elena's access to classified information went far beyond routine cargo manifests, and her ability to analyze experimental weapons data came from training that no logistics specialist should possess. Before the commander could pursue the implications of her knowledge, the lead raider vessel completed its energy buildup and fired. The beam that lanced toward the Stellar Harmony was unlike anything Elena had seen in her tactical analysis training. It seemed to bend space itself around its path, creating distortion effects that played havoc with the ship's sensor systems. The strike hit their remaining shields with devastating force, completely overwhelming the defensive barriers and allowing the residual energy to slam into the hull directly. Entire sections of the ship's outer armor plating simply ceased to exist, vaporized by energies that operated on principles Elena didn't recognize. "Catastrophic damage to decks 1 through 5, Silkai reported, her crystalline structure flickering with stress patterns that indicated near panic. "We've lost main power to 40% of ship systems. Hull integrity is critical." Elena knew they had minutes at most before the raiders finished them off. The experimental torpedoes represented their only hope, but they would need to be armed and deployed using systems that were never designed for combat operations. "I need access to Cargo Bay 12, she announced, already moving toward the command center's exit. "And I need an engineering team that isn't afraid of potentially lethal radiation exposure." "Specialist Vasquez," Commander Yurixtel called after her. "Those prototypes are experimental for a reason. The quantum resonance principles are theoretical at best, and the containment systems are untested under combat conditions." Elena paused at the doorway, turning back to face the command staff. For a moment, her carefully maintained facade of competent mediocrity completely disappeared, replaced by something that was unmistakably predatory. "Commander, with respect, we're about to be destroyed by raiders using technology we don't understand." This is exactly the time for desperate measures and untested theories. She didn't wait for permission before leaving the command center, trusting that necessity would override military protocol. Behind her, she could hear Commander Urix Tell issuing orders to support her improvised plan, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and resignation. Cargo Bay 12 was deep in the ship's interior, accessible only through corridors that were now filled with emergency lighting and the acrid smell of burned electronics. Elena made her way through the damaged sections with the sure-footed confidence of someone who had memorized the ship's layout completely. The engineering team she found waiting for her consisted of 3 beings from different species, all of whom looked like they would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Chief Engineer Mordek was a massive Ursani whose natural armor had been supplemented with radiation shielding, while his assistants included a nimble Vorthan and a heavily modified android.
"Are you certain this will work?" Mordek asked as they approached the cargo containers that held the experimental weapons.
"No," Elena replied honestly, "but I'm certain that doing nothing will get us all killed." The quantum resonance torpedoes were unlike any weapons Elena had seen before. Each one was roughly the size of a standard shipping container but filled with technology that seemed to defy conventional physics. The warheads were contained within fields that bent light around them, creating an optical effect that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Elena studied the technical specifications while the engineering team worked to modify the ship's remaining cargo launchers for compatibility with the experimental weapons. The torpedoes operated by creating resonance patterns in quantum field structures, theoretically allowing them to bypass conventional shielding by existing in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. It was the sort of weapon that might revolutionize space warfare if it worked as designed. If it didn't work, it would probably destroy the stellar harmony more efficiently than the Raiders ever could. "Modifications complete," the Vorthan assistant reported. "The launchers are configured for quantum resonance deployment, but we can't test the interface systems without actually firing the weapons." Elena nodded, her mind already calculating trajectory solutions and target priorities. The Raiders had reformed their attack formation and were preparing for what appeared to be a final assault. Their energy readings suggested they were bringing all their weapons to bear simultaneously, probably planning to vaporize what remained of the supply ship in a single coordinated strike. "Engineering team, clear the bay and seal all access points," Elena ordered. "If these things malfunction, I don't want anyone else caught in the containment failure. Someone needs to manually coordinate the launch sequence. The targeting systems aren't designed for weapons this exotic and we'll only get one chance to make this work." Elena positioned herself at the bay's control console, her hands moving across interfaces that were designed for cargo handling rather than weapons deployment. Through the bay's observation windows, she could see the enemy vessels approaching in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with energy that suggested imminent weapons fire. She activated the quantum resonance torpedoes one by one, watching their containment field stabilize and their guidance systems initialize. The weapons hummed with barely contained power that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull, creating harmonic vibrations that were felt rather than heard. The Raiders opened fire just as Elena triggered the launch sequence, filling space between the two forces with energy beams that would have destroyed any conventional target. But the quantum resonance torpedoes didn't interact with those beams in any predictable way. They seemed to pass through the enemy fire as if it didn't exist, following trajectories that bent and twisted through dimensions that Elena's human perception couldn't fully comprehend. The first torpedo reached its target and simply disappeared, vanishing from all sensor readings as if it had never existed. For a moment, Elena thought the weapon had malfunctioned completely. Then the lead Raider vessel began to come apart from the inside out, its hull fragmenting along lines of stress that followed no recognizable pattern. The second and third torpedoes struck their targets simultaneously, creating cascade failures that spread through the Raiders' formation like a contagion. Each ship they hit didn't just explode, it collapsed in on itself, the fundamental forces holding its atoms together disrupted by weapons that operated outside conventional physics. Within minutes, the entire enemy fleet had been reduced to expanding clouds of metallic debris, their advanced technology rendered useless against weapons that attacked reality itself rather than mere matter and energy. Elena stared at the tactical displays, hardly believing what she had witnessed. The experimental torpedoes had worked better than their designers had dared hope, completely eliminating a threat that conventional weapons couldn't have touched. but she also understood that she had just demonstrated capabilities that no logistics specialist should possess. Her knowledge of experimental weapons, her tactical analysis skills, and her ability to improvise solutions under extreme pressure were all inconsistent with her supposed background and training. When Commander Yrixtal arrived in Cargo Bay 15 minutes later, accompanied by his senior staff and a security detail, Elena was still standing at the control console. Her expression was calm despite the magnitude of what had just occurred, as if she fought impossible battles against technologically superior enemies on a regular basis. "Specialist Vasquez," the commander said formally, "I believe it's time you explained exactly who you are and what you're doing aboard my ship." Elena looked around at the assembled officers, seeing expressions that ranged from gratitude to suspicion to outright fear. She had saved the Stellar Harmony and everyone aboard it, but in doing so she had revealed herself to be something other than the harmless logistics specialist she had pretended to be. The time for deception was over. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of when their survival was at stake. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said quietly, "and I'm an intelligence operative for Earth Command. But after what I've seen of the Confederation and the threats it faces, I think it's time for my mission parameters to change." Part 5. The silence in Cargo Bay 12 stretched for nearly a full minute after Elena's admission, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's emergency life support systems and the occasional creak of stressed metal as the Stellar Harmony adjusted to the damage it had sustained. Commander Yrixtal's forearms moved independently as he processed the implications of what he had just heard, while his senior staff exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their shock and confusion. Elena remained motionless at the control console, her hand still resting on the interfaces she had used to deploy the quantum resonance torpedoes. She had crossed a line from which there was no return, abandoning the careful deception that had protected her for months in favor of a truth that would reshape everything. "An intelligence operative," Commander Yrixtal repeated slowly, his translated voice carrying undertones that suggested he was struggling to reconcile this revelation with his previous understanding of her capabilities. "Working for Earth Command." "Yes, sir." "For how long?" "Since before I was assigned to the Academy on Nexus 7, Elena replied. "My mission was to infiltrate the Confederation military, assess strategic capabilities and vulnerabilities, and report my findings back to Earth." Lieutenant Commander Silkai's crystalline structure flickered with patterns that indicated deep analytical thought. "The incident with the Kratharari recruits during orientation. Your knowledge of alien physiology and pressure points. That was part of your cover?" "Actually, no," Elena said with a slight smile. "That was me losing my temper and forgetting that I was supposed to be harmless." And Senior Chief Torgan stepped forward from his position near the cargo bay entrance, his scarred exoskeleton gleaming under the emergency lighting. Elena noticed that he didn't look particularly surprised by her revelation, though his compound eyes reflected something that might have been approval. "The question," he said in his gravelly voice, "is what you meant when you said your mission parameters need to change." Elena turned to face the assembled group, knowing that her next words would determine not just her own fate, but potentially the future relationship between Earth and the Galactic Confederation. "When I was sent here, Earth Command believed that the Confederation represented a potential threat to human independence. We were the newest member species, relegated to support roles and treated as inferior by the established military powers. My mission was to identify weaknesses that could be exploited if conflict became inevitable." She paused, looking around at faces that represented half a dozen different species, all of whom had just watched her save their lives using tactics and knowledge that should have been beyond her capabilities. "But what I found was something different than what my superiors expected. Yes, the Confederation has problems. Yes, there's discrimination and political maneuvering and bureaucratic inefficiency. But there's also something worth preserving, an organization that, despite its flaws, represents the best hope for maintaining peace across a galaxy full of species that have every reason to distrust each other." Commander Yrixtal gestured for her to continue, his expression unreadable but attentive. The Void Hunters represent a threat that goes beyond any single species or world. Their technology is decades ahead of anything in the Confederation's arsenal. Their tactics suggest extensive military training and coordination, and their strategic objectives indicate a comprehensive campaign to dismantle the established order. Earth can't face that threat alone, and neither can the Confederation as it currently exists.
Elena moved away from the control console, her posture shifting from defensive to something that was unmistakably commanding.
The transformation was subtle but profound, as if she were finally allowing herself to be seen as she truly was, rather than as she had pretended to be. What I'm proposing is a partnership, not the kind of relationship where humans are treated as junior members who should be grateful for scraps, but a genuine collaboration between equals who recognize that their mutual survival depends on working together. And what authority do you have to make such a proposal? Asked Chief Engineer Mordek, his massive Ursani frame still bearing scorch marks from their improvised weapons deployment. None, officially, Elena admitted, but I have something that might be more valuable than authority. I have detailed intelligence about Confederation military capabilities, comprehensive analysis of the Void Hunter threat, and tactical knowledge that could make the difference between victory and extinction. She activated the cargo bay's main display screen, calling up files that she had been compiling for months. The information that appeared was staggering in its scope and detail. Strategic assessments, technological analyses, personnel evaluations, and operational recommendations that represented the most comprehensive intelligence overview ever assembled by a single operative. This is what I've been gathering during my time aboard the Stellar Harmony and throughout my infiltration of Confederation systems, she explained. It represents everything Earth Command wanted to know about your military capabilities, but it also represents something more. A blueprint for transforming the Confederation into an organization that can actually defend the galaxy against threats like the Void Hunters. Commander Wyrickstel studied the displayed information with growing amazement, his enhanced cognitive capabilities processing data streams that would have overwhelmed most beings. This level of analysis, it would take our best intelligence services years to compile information this comprehensive. Humans have certain advantages when it comes to pattern recognition and strategic thinking, Elena said simply. We've had to develop those skills in order to survive in a universe full of species that are physically superior to us. His compound eyes tracking across tactical recommendations and strategic assessments that demonstrated levels of military insight he had rarely seen even among senior command staff. These recommendations, he said slowly, they're not designed to exploit Confederation weaknesses. They're designed to eliminate them. The traditional human approach would be to identify vulnerabilities and prepare to exploit them, but what I'm proposing is that we work together to eliminate those vulnerabilities, creating a military organization that's actually capable of defending the galaxy against external threats. Elena highlighted specific sections of her analysis, showing how species-specific equipment requirements could be standardized without sacrificing individual capabilities, how communication barriers could be overcome through improved translation protocols, and how cultural conflicts could be resolved through better understanding of different species' psychological and social needs. The Confederation's greatest strength is its diversity, she continued, but that strength has been undermined by political structures that emphasize competition rather than cooperation. The Void Hunters succeeded because they faced opponents who were divided, suspicious of each other, and unable to coordinate effective responses. She called up her analysis of the recent battle, showing how their improvised defense had succeeded precisely because it had combined human tactical thinking with Confederation technology and multi-species crew coordination. What we accomplished here, a supply ship defeating a technologically superior enemy fleet, that's what becomes possible when different species work together instead of trying to maintain separate hierarchies. She wasn't just offering intelligence about enemy capabilities or technological innovations, she was suggesting a fundamental restructuring of how the Confederation military operated. This would require approval at the highest levels, Lieutenant Commander Silkai pointed out. The kind of changes you're proposing would affect every aspect of military policy and organization. which is why I'm hoping that this crew, which has just demonstrated the effectiveness of interspecies cooperation under impossible circumstances, might be willing to serve as a proof of concept. Elena replied. She turned to Commander Urixtel, recognizing that his decision would determine whether her proposal had any chance of moving forward. Sir, the Stellar Harmony is already scheduled for extensive repairs after the battle damage we sustained. Instead of simply returning to standard configuration, I'm proposing that we use the refit as an opportunity to implement the organizational and tactical improvements I've outlined. Create a truly integrated crew where species work together as equals, with command authority based on competence rather than political considerations. Commander Urixtel was quiet for a long moment, his forearms working to process probability calculations and strategic assessments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he understood the historical significance of the moment. What you're proposing would make the Stellar Harmony a test case for an entirely new approach to military organization. If it works, it could revolutionize how the Confederation operates. If it fails, Elena finished, we'll be no worse off than we are now. The current system is already inadequate against threats like the Void Hunters. At least this approach gives us a chance to build something better. Over the following hours, as the Stellar Harmony limped toward the nearest repair facility, Elena found herself in continuous discussions with the ship's senior staff about the implementation of her proposed changes. The conversations were unlike anything she had experienced during her infiltration mission. Instead of carefully gathering information while maintaining her cover, she was openly sharing her knowledge and working collaboratively to solve complex organizational challenges. The ship's senior staff proved to be remarkably receptive to her ideas, partly because they had just witnessed the effectiveness of her tactical recommendations, and partly because many of them had harbored similar concerns about Confederation military efficiency. Torgan, in particular, became an enthusiastic advocate for Elena's proposals. His decades of experience had given him a deep understanding of the military's systemic problems, and he immediately grasped how her recommendations could address issues that had frustrated him throughout his career. The human perspective brings something we've been missing, he explained during a planning session in the ship's conference room. We've been so focused on accommodating different species that we've never properly integrated them. Each group maintains its own equipment, its own procedures, its own command structure. It's inefficient and it creates unnecessary barriers to cooperation. Elena's proposal for standardized equipment with species-specific modifications was particularly well received. Instead of maintaining separate supply chains for dozens of different types of gear, the ship would use common base equipment that could be quickly adapted for different physiological requirements. More controversially, she recommended that command authority be based entirely on demonstrated competence rather than species-based hierarchies or political considerations. This meant that positions would be filled by whoever was most qualified, regardless of whether they came from a traditionally warrior species or one that was considered more suited to support roles. The first test of this approach came when Commander Urixtel announced that Elena would be promoted to lieutenant and assigned as the ship's new chief intelligence officer. The promotion represented a dramatic break with normal procedures. She had neither the traditional qualifications nor the political connections that usually accompanied such positions. But her performance during the Void Hunter battle had demonstrated capabilities that transcended normal evaluation criteria. Her tactical analysis had saved the ship, her knowledge of experimental weapons had provided the means for victory, and her strategic recommendations offered a path forward that conventional military thinking couldn't match. Some species representatives complained that giving a human such a senior position violated established protocols and set a dangerous precedent. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Elena's capabilities firsthand, argued that competence should outweigh traditional hierarchies. The debate continued for days as the Stellar Harmony underwent repairs at Starbase Omega 1-5, a massive orbital facility that served as the Confederation's primary maintenance hub for the 7th Fleet. Elena found herself at the center of discussions about military reform that went far beyond her original mission parameters. Representatives from Confederation Command arrived to investigate the Void Hunter incident and evaluate Elena's proposals for organizational change. The interviews were extensive and sometimes hostile, as senior officers struggled to understand how a human intelligence operative had managed to infiltrate their system so thoroughly while simultaneously developing solutions to problems they hadn't even recognized. Elena's reports to Earth Command during this period reflected the complex evolution of her loyalties and objectives. She continued to provide intelligence about Confederation capabilities, but her recommendations now focused on strengthening rather than exploiting the organization she had been sent to undermine. The response from her superiors was predictably mixed. Some Earth Command officials were pleased with the intelligence windfall she had provided, while others were concerned about her apparent identification with Confederation interests. Her request for authorization to continue working within the Confederation military as a legitimate officer rather than an undercover operative generated heated debates about human strategic objectives and long-term security interests. The resolution came in the form of a classified communication that Elena received during the final stages of the Stellar Harmony's refit. Earth Command had decided to support her recommendation for partnership with the Confederation, but with specific conditions and limitations designed to protect human interests while allowing for the cooperation she had proposed. Elena was authorized to continue her work within the Confederation military, with the understanding that she would serve dual roles as both a legitimate officer and a continuing intelligence asset. Her mission parameters were expanded to include active cooperation with Confederation forces while maintaining her reporting responsibilities to Earth Command. More importantly, Earth would begin providing technological and tactical assistance to the Confederation, sharing innovations that could improve their collective ability to face external threats like the Void Hunters. In return, humans would be granted full equality within the military structure, with assignments based on capability rather than species-based assumptions about their limitations. The Stellar Harmony officially relaunched 3 weeks later, with Elena serving as Chief Intelligence Officer and the ship designated as a test platform for integrated multi-species operations. The crew had been reorganized according to her recommendations, with positions filled based on demonstrated competence rather than traditional hierarchies. The result was a vessel unlike any other in the Confederation fleet, a ship where humans worked alongside Crethari, Threnodai, Ursani, and dozens of other species as genuine equals, united by shared objectives rather than divided by historical prejudices and political maneuvering. Elena stood on the ship's observation deck as they departed Starbase Omega 1-5, watching the stars wheel past as the Stellar Harmony began its first mission under the new organizational structure. Beside her, Torgan observed the same view with what she had learned to recognize as satisfaction. "The galaxy is going to be very surprised by what we've accomplished here," he said quietly. Elena nodded, thinking about the long journey that had brought her from Earth's covert intelligence services to legitimate command within an organization she had been sent to subvert. "The thing about humans," she replied, echoing words she had spoken months earlier to a very different audience, "is that we adapt, we learn, and we never give up." The Stellar Harmony jumped to hyperspace, carrying its integrated crew toward whatever challenges awaited them among the stars. Behind them, they left a galaxy that was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength was not their individual capabilities, but their ability to bring out the best in others. The Confederation would never be the same, and neither would the species that had learned to see past ancient prejudices toward a future where cooperation replaced competition as the foundation of galactic civilization. Elena Vasquez had completed her mission, though not in any way that Earth Command had originally envisioned. She had infiltrated the enemy and discovered that sometimes the greatest victory came not from defeating your opponents, but from turning them into allies. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers that no single species could face alone. But together, united by shared purpose rather than divided by artificial barriers, they might just be strong enough to defend the peace they had all learned to value. The alleged weakness had indeed been a lie, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity's true strength was not in their ability to fight, but in their ability to forge alliances that made fighting unnecessary. And Elena Vasquez, the small human woman who had once been dismissed as too weak for real military service, had become the architect of a transformation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what strength truly meant.